There are two fundamental approaches that companies take toward trying to innovate. They're not mutually exclusive, so it's possible to combine some of both. In fact, a lot of companies do. The first approach is what they call the autonomous approach in the book. You can also call it the bottom-up approach. And that would be as simply illustrated by something like just putting a suggestion box in the workplace and saying, hey, if you got an idea for the company, just throw it in there. That's more likely to come up with process innovations, but nonetheless, the idea is ideas are everywhere. Let's give everybody a voice. Let's see what happens. In companies that are doing product innovation, what happens is somebody gets an idea and they start to work on it. And believe it or not, the heroes of this process are often not the top managers in the business, but the middle managers who do a very good job of getting this product moving along, and then at some point presenting it to the company hierarchy and say, hey, we've got this new idea. We've got all these things done. What do you think? Let's greenlight that. Let's give it some more money and let's let it go. And that's what happens. And that's why in the bottom up or autonomous process, product champions are pivotal. In the induced or top down strategy, this is more where the company leadership says, hey, we want to do these things, and they assign innovation tasks, if you will, within the company, and it is guided. It's very purposeful. The two companies that illustrate these two approaches are Google for the autonomous approach and Apple for the induced approach. Very little happens at Apple without being sanctioned first from high coming down. Google, on the other hand, is famous for its 20% time for its engineers, which is to say that they can spend 20% of their time working on whatever project interests them. In the very innovative days of Google, they did a study and they found that about 50% of the products that they rolled out came from this 20% time, or this autonomous style of innovation where people just have a chance to work on things and they gain momentum and they flow to the top. But they have pros and cons. An advantage of the top-down or induced mode is that the corporate leadership actually is deciding for strategic reasons, we think this is where we're going. It tends to be a more efficient process because you don't have to give engineers 20% of their time to work on whatever they want. They're spending all of their time working on what the company wants. It tends to be cleaner from a budgetary perspective because money is specifically budgeted to pay for these ideas. On the downside, you're putting all the responsibility for coming up with the good ideas with the senior leadership, and they may not be very good at recognizing ideas that they didn't come up with as being really, really strong potential for successful innovations. Autonomous, that approach is fantastic for engaging people and letting the wisdom of crowds speak to you, so to speak. But we know we don't know everything, so let's just see some things bubble up, and let's let people really be creative and tell us what works well. The downside is you have some wasted time, you have some wasted expertise, you potentially have hurt feelings when people's ideas don't get green lighted and they don't take off and grow. But both approaches work. It just depends on what companies want to do. Again, I want to emphasize that as much as we talk about this, it's hard. Keep in mind, the incremental innovations are much safer and less risky, and that's why big companies are good at them. Radical innovations, a lot different deal. On average, companies need to have what I call a decent batting average. What I mean by that is, if you're a baseball player, you can't go up to the plate and strike out every time. You've got to get some hits, because if you don't, you're not going to be a baseball player because you're going to get benched. You're going to get kicked off the team because you're not producing. So we're going to talk more about failure, but there's got to be this sense of you've got to be at least reasonably good at it so that you have some successes to pay for the failures. But here's the real issue with big companies in particular. I'm going to use a medical metaphor. When a person needs a new organ, they worry about organ rejection, which is to say that the rest of the body, your immune system and all, it goes to attack this organ and it never catches on, if you will, in the body, and it fails. This is what happens so much in companies. Good ideas or potential ideas come into a company, and then the rest of the company goes, ooh, no, we don't want to do that. Organ rejection. For all those reasons I talked about earlier, you're goring their ox. it is risky. You're putting their job at risk. And so what companies, the number one issue companies have to work against when they're working with new ideas is, how do we limit the possibility of organ rejection when we really have a strong potential idea? So here's how you limit the potential of doing organ rejections. You build cross-functional teams. The textbook does a nice job of talking about this, because lots of different entities have a stake in it. Not only might the idea be more practical, but they feel like instead of it being this new thing coming in from outside, or it's not my idea, suddenly more people in the company have a stake in it. More departments have a stake in it, and they can feel like it was my idea. And so it makes them feel better about it. To make that happen, you need a mix of youth and experience. Youth to have that outsider perspective, to really go for that radical idea, to see potential of things that are not the normal way business is done. But you also need, and I don't exactly fit this mode anymore. They used to say some gray hairs. I do have gray on the side of my head when my hair grows there. But you need people with experience. They have social capital. They have ties within the company. They can make things happen. They have a certain wisdom. And they found you need both components to make a good cross-functional team. You need technical expertise. The product needs to be real, but you also need social skill and social capital to get the idea to take off. You are going to fail. Failure is inevitable. And so it's important when you fail to try to figure out, as a series of experiments, okay, can we get to this level? Yes or no? If the answer is no, it's a failure and you move on. But when you fail, you make sure that you learn as much as you can from each of these events. And to learn from a failure, you have to see them in a positive light, as opposed to, oh, that was horrible, we failed. In the next bullet, there are two key words: rotate, invest. Some companies have tended to put up new product teams or new innovation organizations, and they put their big thinkers in that. That doesn't tend to work because of organ rejection. The rest of the entity looks on them and says, I don't like those people. They're all the ones who have the foosball tables and they get to play games. Instead, what you do is you rotate people through the innovation function. And then suddenly the person 5 years after they've been on the innovation team sees something come out of the innovation team. They go like, oh, that's really cool. I had a good experience there. Yes, that's really popular. So you want to rotate people through these functions so that later on they don't do organ rejection. And second, you want to make sure you put your best people through there. This needs to be on the pathway to success. You want people saying, hey, I want to go to that new innovation organization, or I want to participate on that cross-functional team because it leads to good outcomes in my career. And then, particularly in the autonomous sort of innovation, you have to create funding and space in the budget. Now, even in top-down, however, you might have to create funding and space in the budget because you can't always put a cost schedule on innovation. It may cost more money to get to the end state that you want, and so you have to be flexible with that. So in the next videos, or in the final video, we're going to talk about external ways companies tie into that, and then we're going to put a wrap on this whole concept.